He was worth millions, but treated me like I was worth nothing. Just another black woman to be dismissed. Until the day everything changed. Now he's on his knees, begging for my love. This is how I turned the tables on a man who had everything, except me. If you've ever been overlooked, underestimated, or made to feel less than because of who you are, this story is for you. Subscribe and hit the notification bell right now, because by the end of this video, you'll see exactly how to turn the tables and claim your true worth. I always knew I was destined for more. Growing up in Chicago's South Side, I'd watch my mom work 2 jobs just to keep food on the table. I promised myself I wouldn't just survive, I'd thrive. 4 years of college on scholarship, 2 years getting my MBA, and countless late nights led me to become the marketing strategist everyone wanted on their team. Ambitious? Absolutely. Hardworking? It's in my DNA. But in this world, being exceptional isn't always enough when you look like me. The first time I met Alexander Westfield was at the annual marketing conference downtown. His keynote had the room captivated, tall, commanding, with that easy confidence that comes from never having doors closed in your face. I approached him afterward, portfolio in hand, hoping to discuss my innovative campaign ideas. "Perhaps someone from my HR department can take your resume," he said, without even looking at my work, eyes already scanning the room for someone more important, someone who looked more like him. I watched as he spent 20 minutes eagerly discussing ideas with a less qualified white colleague. That sting of dismissal, it wasn't new, but it never hurts less. So when Westfield Industries posted a senior marketing position 2 months later, part of me wanted to laugh at the irony. But another part, the fighter in me, saw opportunity. Their campaigns lacked the cultural relevance and diversity perspective they desperately needed to reach new markets. I knew I could transform their approach, even if their CEO couldn't see my value yet. Against my best friend's advice, I applied, interviewed, and landed the job. Walking into that gleaming office tower on my first day, I felt the weight of being the only one again. Executive floor, 32 white faces, 1 Asian director, and me. The side glances, the assumption I was from HR or support staff. "I'm Zara Williams, your new marketing director," became my most repeated phrase that morning. The surprise on their faces would have been comical if it wasn't so exhausting. Alex barely acknowledged me at my first executive meeting. I presented my analysis of their failing youth campaign, and he checked his phone throughout. When David, my white male colleague, essentially repeated my points 15 minutes later, Alex nodded enthusiastically. "Excellent insight, David." I swallowed my frustration and made a mental note. Document everything, work twice as hard, leave no room for excuses. For 3 months, I arrived first and left last. I revamped their social media strategy, increasing engagement by 47%. I secured partnerships with influencers who actually resonated with untapped demographics. My campaigns began outperforming all others, and the numbers couldn't be ignored, even by Alex. During one meeting, I caught him watching me as I debated strategy with the finance team, defending my budget requests with irrefutable data. Something shifted in his expression, surprise, maybe respect, before his assistant called him away. The first genuine interaction came when he stopped by my office late one evening. "The Thompson campaign numbers are impressive," he said, leaning against my doorway. I noticed he actually knew my work now, was referring to my ideas by name. "Thank you," I replied, waiting for the but that usually followed compliments to black women. Instead, he asked about my approach, actually listening this time. As I explained my strategy, I could see calculations happening behind those blue eyes, not just about the campaign, but about me. He was reassessing, recategorizing. I wasn't just a black woman to him in that moment. I was becoming a valuable asset. It was progress, sure, but being seen as an asset still feels different from being seen as a person. and I was starting to wonder if Alexander Westfield would ever see me, truly see me at all. 3 months turned into 6, and I had proven myself enough to become a fixture in strategy meetings. But that didn't mean things got easier. The day Alex announced I would be leading the pitch for our biggest potential client, Horizon Global, I saw the sideways glances from colleagues who believed they deserved it more. What they didn't know was how many extra hours I'd put in, how many brilliant ideas I'd had dismissed before finally breaking through. They didn't see me practicing presentations in empty conference rooms during lunch, while they networked at expensive restaurants. Zara will be working directly with me on this, Alex announced, his tone leaving no room for debate. I should have felt triumphant. Instead, I felt the target on my back grow larger. Working with Alex meant long evenings dissecting market trends, debating strategies, and rebuilding presentations over and over. "This isn't quite right," he'd say, without explaining what he wanted. When I asked for clarification, he'd look almost surprised, as if I should just instinctively understand his vision. Privilege is expecting the world to read your mind. During our 3rd revision session, I finally snapped. "With all due respect, either articulate what you want or trust me to do my job." The conference room fell silent. No one spoke to Alex Westfield that way, especially not a black woman who'd been there less than a year. His eyes narrowed, but then something unexpected happened. He actually smiled. "You're right, I'm being unclear. What I'm trying to say is that we need something bolder, and you're the only one thinking outside the box." That night marked a shift. He began asking questions about my background, my education, my perspective. But even as he sought my input, the microaggressions continued. In a meeting with the executive team, he introduced me as articulate and surprisingly strategic. That word, surprisingly, hanging in the air like stale smoke. When I presented my comprehensive market analysis, the CFO turned to Alex instead of me with his questions. Alex redirected them to me the first time, but by the 3rd question, he was answering himself, stealing my moment without even realizing it. I confronted him afterward. "If you believe in my abilities enough to put me on this project, then believe in them enough to let me speak for myself." His face registered shock, then embarrassment. "I was trying to support you," he said. "Support looks like making space, not taking it," I countered. He looked at me differently then, really looked, as if seeing dimensions of me that had been invisible before. The following weeks brought a strange new dynamic. Alex began deferring to me in meetings, sometimes excessively so. "What does Zara think?" became his new refrain. Part of me appreciated the recognition, but another part felt like a token, the black woman whose opinions suddenly mattered because the powerful white man decreed it so. The complexity of my feelings toward him grew more tangled. I respected his business acumen. I appreciated his attempts, however clumsy, to do better. And yes, I noticed the way his voice softened when we were alone, how he lingered in conversations that had nothing to do with profit margins. One evening, we found ourselves working late, takeout containers littering the conference table. "Why marketing?" he asked suddenly. "Not why Westfield Industries, not why this project, but why my passion?" For once, it felt like a question about me as a person. I told him about growing up seeing advertisements that never included faces like mine, about wanting to change narratives and expand representations. For once, he just listened. "I've never thought about marketing that way," he admitted, "as a force for cultural change." "That's the privilege of being the default," I said, not unkindly. "You never had to." Something flickered in his eyes. Discomfort, curiosity, and something warmer. He reached for the last spring roll at the same moment I did, our fingers brushing. The electricity between us was undeniable, but so was my internal conflict. How could I be attracted to someone who had dismissed me so easily? Someone who was just beginning to unlearn his biases? Someone who still benefited from the very systems that made my journey so much harder. I pulled my hand back first. "It's getting late," I said, gathering my papers. As I walked toward the elevator, he called after me. "Zara, the Horizon presentation tomorrow. It's your vision we're going with, completely yours." It wasn't quite an apology for months of underestimation, but it was acknowledgement. Progress measured in small steps still counts as forward motion. That night, I couldn't sleep. Part of me was rehearsing my presentation, but another part was replaying our conversation, that brief touch, the look in his eyes. I told myself it was just professional satisfaction I was feeling, pride in finally breaking through someone's preconceptions. But deep down, I knew it was more complicated than that. I was starting to care what Alexander Westfield thought of me, and not just as a colleague. That realization terrified me more than any boardroom battle ever could. The Horizon presentation was a success, until it wasn't. We landed the account, celebrations erupted, and champagne flowed freely throughout the office. Alex even gave me full credit publicly, his hand resting briefly on my shoulder as he announced, "This is Zara's vision brought to life." For a moment, I allowed myself to bask in the victory, in the validation. But success has a way of revealing true colors, and not always in ways you expect. 3 weeks into the Horizon campaign launch, disaster struck. Their CEO called Alex directly. Engagement numbers were plummeting, social media responses were tepid, and they were threatening to pull the account. The leadership team assembled in the main conference room, panic evident on every face. I sat quietly reviewing the analytics on my tablet while everyone shouted blame and desperate solutions. "We need to pivot back to the traditional approach," argued David, the same colleague who had parroted my ideas months earlier. "This diverse messaging angle isn't resonating with their core demographic." Alex paced at the head of the table, tie loosened, running his hand through his hair. "Zara, your thoughts?" All eyes turned to me, most expecting me to defend a failing strategy. But I hadn't spent my entire career fighting uphill battles without learning how to navigate treacherous terrain. The campaign isn't failing because of diversity. It's failing because we're not being authentic enough. I pulled up side-by-side comparisons, showing how our carefully manufactured diversity felt performative rather than genuine. Consumers can smell inauthenticity from a mile away. We don't need less diversity. We need more honesty. The room fell silent. I continued, outlining a bold strategy that would require Horizon to make real commitments to inclusion, not just in their marketing, but in their business practices. It was risky. I was essentially telling a client they needed to change who they were, not just how they advertised. "That's commercial suicide," the CFO muttered. "We can't tell Horizon how to run their business." "Actually," Alex said slowly, studying the numbers I'd presented, "we can if we prove it's profitable." He looked at me with new eyes, not as a diversity hire, not as an attractive woman, but as the person holding the solution no one else could see. "How fast can you relaunch?" 72 hours, I answered, already mentally assembling my team. What followed was the most intense 3 days of my professional life. I barely slept, coordinating teams across time zones, personally reviewing every piece of content. Alex was there every step of the way, not micromanaging, but supporting, removing obstacles, bringing food when I forgot to eat. On the second night, when everyone else had gone home, he sat beside me, reviewing metrics until 3 a.m. "Why are you still here?" I asked, realizing we were alone in the darkened office, the city lights glittering through the windows. "You could have any team member doing this." He was quiet for a long moment. "Because I want to understand how you see things that the rest of us miss. How you knew this would work when everyone else, including me, had doubts." His voice softened. "I've been in this business for 15 years, Zara. I thought I knew everything there was to know about connecting with people, but you've shown me how much I've been missing." The vulnerability in his admission caught me off guard. This wasn't the same man who had dismissed me at that conference, who had checked his phone during my presentations. "It's not magic," I said. "It's lived experience. When you've spent your life having to see the world through other people's perspectives just to survive, you develop a kind of double vision. I understand your world because I had to. You never had to understand mine." He nodded slowly, taking in my words. "I'm sorry," he said simply. Not the defensive apology I'd heard from countless white colleagues over the years, the quick "I'm sorry if you felt that way" that places the burden back on you. This was different. "I'm sorry for not seeing you, really seeing you." The campaign relaunched the next day, and within hours, the numbers started climbing. By the end of the week, engagement had tripled. Horizon's CEO called to personally congratulate us, asking for an expanded contract. The office was buzzing with excitement, and I found myself at the center of it all, no longer the outsider, but the savior. In the aftermath of what became known as the Horizon Miracle, something fundamental shifted between Alex and me. Respect had deepened into something more complex. He sought my opinion, not just on campaigns, but on company culture, hiring practices, his own blind spots. We began having lunch regularly, conversations extending far beyond work. I learned about his lonely childhood in boarding schools. He learned about my grandmother, who had marched with Dr. King. Barriers fell away, one vulnerable conversation at a time. The moment everything truly changed came during the company's annual charity gala. I wore a deep red gown that highlighted the richness of my skin tone, my hair in a natural updo. When I entered the ballroom, conversations paused momentarily. Alex was speaking with investors, but stopped mid-sentence when he saw me, excusing himself to cross the room. "You look stunning," he said, his eyes never leaving mine. Then, more quietly, "Would you dance with me?" On that dance floor, with his hand respectfully at my waist, something crystallized between us. The professional admiration, the intellectual connection, the growing personal bond, it all converged into something undeniable. As he held me, just a fraction closer than strictly professional, I realized that Alexander Westfield, the man who once couldn't be bothered to look at my portfolio, now couldn't take his eyes off me. Not because I had changed, but because he had finally learned to see. That dance changed everything, though neither of us acknowledged it immediately. We returned to work the following Monday, pretending the electricity between us had been nothing more than champagne and good music. But something had shifted irreversibly. In meetings, I'd catch him watching me with an expression that had nothing to do with profit margins. When our hands accidentally brushed as we reached for the same document, neither of us pulled away quite as quickly as we should have. 2 weeks after the gala, Alex invited me to dinner. "To discuss your promotion," he said, though we both knew it was more. I suggested a restaurant in my neighborhood, a small, black-owned jazz spot, far from the sleek downtown establishments where executives typically dined. If he wanted to explore what was growing between us, he needed to step into my world for a change. To his credit, he came without hesitation. I watched as he took in the soulful music, the diverse crowd, the photos of jazz legends lining the walls. He was the minority here, and I could see the subtle discomfort of that unfamiliarity in his posture. Yet there was also curiosity, openness. He asked questions about the musicians, the history of the neighborhood, listened intently to stories of how gentrification had threatened the venue's existence. "I've lived in this city for 12 years, he admitted, "and I've never been to this part of town." The awareness of his limited perspective seemed to humble him. "There are whole worlds within worlds that exist outside your experience, Alex," I said gently. "That's true for all of us, but some people have the privilege of never having to venture outside their comfort zones." Our professional discussion lasted all of 15 minutes before conversation turned personal. He spoke about growing up with wealth but emotional poverty, about realizing how his father's subtle prejudices had shaped his own unconscious biases. I shared stories of working twice as hard for half the recognition, of code switching so often I sometimes forgot which version of myself was the real one. With you, he said, reaching for my hand across the table, I feel like I'm finally seeing the whole picture, not just of the world, but of myself. The vulnerability in his eyes was something no amount of money could fake. Our relationship evolved slowly, deliberately. We kept it private at first, not out of shame, but to protect the fragile new thing growing between us from office politics and inevitable whispers. On weekends, I introduced him to spoken-word poetry slams, community gardens, in historically black neighborhoods, the small church where my aunt sang gospel. He showed me his world too. Sailing on the lake at dawn, the rare book collection he'd inherited from his grandfather. Quiet moments in his penthouse watching the city lights. At work, he became a different kind of leader. I watched him elevate diverse voices in meetings, challenge tone-deaf marketing concepts, institute new hiring practices. When a senior executive made a racially insensitive comment, assuming Alex would laugh along as he might have months ago, Alex shut it down immediately. That perspective has no place in this company, he said firmly. The change wasn't performative, it was profound. The true test came 6 months into our relationship, at the industry's annual leadership conference, the same event where we'd first met. Alex was scheduled to give the keynote address again. I sat in the audience, now a respected director in my own right, watching as he took the stage. Last year, he began, I stood here and talked about innovation and market disruption. I thought I understood what those words meant. He paused, his eyes finding mine in the crowd. I was wrong. True disruption isn't just about technology or business models. It's about disrupting the systems that hold certain voices back. It's about recognizing that brilliance comes in all forms, all colors, all backgrounds, and that when we fail to see that, we all lose. He spoke eloquently about unconscious bias in the industry, about his own journey of awakening. Without naming me directly, he shared how one person had transformed his understanding not just of business, but of privilege, perspective, and possibility. The audience sat in stunned silence before erupting into applause. Afterward, as industry leaders crowded around him, he excused himself and made his way directly to me. In front of colleagues, competitors, and former mentors, Alexander Westfield, the man worth millions, the industry titan, dropped to one knee. Zara Williams, he said, taking my hand, his voice thick with emotion. You saw me at my worst and challenged me to be my best. You didn't just change my company, you changed my heart. From his pocket, he pulled not a ring, but a small key. This is to my office, my home, my life, if you'll have them. I'm not asking you to fit into my world anymore. I'm asking if we can build a new one together. Whispers erupted around us. I could practically hear the assumptions, the gold digger narrative some would inevitably construct. But I also saw genuine joy on many faces, recognition of something authentic and earned. I helped him to his feet, unwilling to let him kneel before me any longer. I didn't fall in love with your money or your power, I said quietly. I fell in love with the man who learned to see me, really see me. That was 2 years ago. Today we lead the company together, equal partners in business and in life. The woman who was once invisible to him now shapes the vision of his empire. More importantly, we're working to create spaces where no one feels unseen, unheard, or underestimated because of who they are. Some call our story a modern fairy tale, but I know better. Fairy tales are about magic transformations. What happened between Alexander and me wasn't magic. It was work, hard, honest, sometimes painful work, to bridge worlds that society had kept separate. It was about a black woman refusing to shrink herself and a privileged man willing to confront uncomfortable truths. It was about love, yes, but love that demanded growth, that required both of us to become more than we had been. The millionaire did come to his knees. But I never wanted him beneath me, only beside me. And that's exactly where he remains, as we build something far more valuable than his fortune. A partnership of equals in a world that rarely makes space for such things. Now you've heard my story of transformation, both his and mine. If this resonated with you, give this video a thumbs up and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Comment below about a time you made someone see your true worth. Remember, sometimes the people who underestimate you the most are the ones who need your strength the most. Subscribe for more stories that will inspire you to stand in your power.